All right, good morning, everyone. We'll get underway. We're just a couple of minutes late, but we're up and running with this DPRSC subcommittee meeting. I do have an apology from Councillor Blackler, who has unfortunately been held up with some sickness in the family. So are there any other apologies?
Mr. Chair, I apologise in advance. I need to leave the meeting between 11 and 11:15. So I do apologise for the early departure, but I have a commitment that I can't avoid.
No. Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. I'm happy to move that we receive those. Seconded by Councillor Linwood. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. All right, we move on to the agenda, and before I ask I do have received an email from Councillor Blackler that I'd like to read out, but Mr. Cook, if you want to open up first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'd like to acknowledge that this is, I anticipate, probably the last DPRSC meeting of this triennium, and really want to thank the committee for the work that they've put in over the period. I think particular mention needs to go to Councillor Hopkins for his extreme diligence. You can always guarantee that Councillor Hopkins will read every page and challenge myself and the officers to make sure that it makes sense that's what's on the page, and brought his enormous RM Commissioner experience. I'd also like to thank Councillor Thompson for his chairmanship of the committee. And on occasions, he's probably had to draw more on his referee skills than his chairmanship. Thank you very much. Prior to Christmas, you made a very courageous decision, along with your fellow councillors, to notify the district plan, which we proceeded to do. At the time, who'd have thought that we would be now having this meeting to consider the government's latest response to plan making, where they've introduced a stop plan provision in the most recent RM Amendment Act changes. So that provision is to allow councils to stop the district plan and plan making. Could be interpreted as it was a very clear direction. And that's what you're here to guide us with today, because within that provision, there's also exemptions. So it comes down to whether you want to direct us to seek an exemption, or whether you want to listen to the government and stop the plan progress. The exemptions that we've put out before you today would support growth in the district, and would allow for the exclusion of the more controversial matters that we've navigated through many hours of meetings over the last 3+ years. So we can spend some time going through those various options. There are 2 options, both of them are viable. In terms of council protocol, we have to land on a preferred one. So David and I have landed on a preferred one, but it is entirely your decision, your direction for the council as to whether we choose one of those or whether we stop altogether. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. If I'd known that you were going to call on my refereeing experience, I would have slapped my red cards in my pocket far sooner in this process. Yeah, I've been given a yellow, and rightly so, because I have not asked for any declarations of interest or of conflict. Mayor Kircher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just acknowledge that I've made a submission to the notified plan.
Thank you. And before we cut Mr. Campbell loose, there is the small matter of confirming the minutes of the previous subcommittee meeting. I'm sure that everyone will have diligently read those. And Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, Mayor, Councillor Thompson, I do have some corrections. On page 8, there are 4. Second line should read, the Waitaki WDC submission will be treated the same as all submissions. At the bottom of the page, further discussion and questions related to, I think it has to read paring back of the definitions, plural, in the Ecosystems and Indigenous Biodiversity chapter. And so I cannot make sense of that sentence without those changes. And there's another sentence a little bit further down. The subcommittee determined to reject the officer recommendation on this particular chapter. And unfortunately, the minutes don't identify which chapter we're talking about, and I believe they should. At the bottom of the page, the word impeding should be impinging. So discussion related to guidelines, testing and enforcement standards impinging on individual property rights. On the next page, second line again, centre design guidelines for the Oamaru Historic Area. And under ecosystems and Indigenous biodiversity, the word difficulty in the third line it should be spelt correctly. It should be difficulty, not difficultly. And finally, Mr. Chair, on page 10, did not have, at the very bottom of the page, did not have the support of the DPRSC, as their view is that a user note that references. Now, again, to make sense of that, I think it has to be the rule, because there is the sentence immediately above refers to rule Eco R1. So I think that a user note that references the rule may not provide the intended clarity and has no bearing on the applicability. With those amendments, I will move the confirmation of the minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. There's no doubt the Christchurch Press's loss was our gain when you shifted to Oamaru. Mayor Kircher?
I'm happy to second that. But just where it notes some apology from myself. It's got me as councillor. I haven't been promoted to that lofty height yet, so just have a correction of that. Thanks.
I'm sure that
I'm shocked that Councillor Hopkins missed that one.
So
all right. All those in favour? Oh, sorry, hang on, before I put the motion, Mr. Campbell.
Just to clarify, back on page 8, when Councillor Hopkins referred to in the middle of the page, the subcommittee determined to reject the officer recommendation on this particular chapter, that was referring to the Ecosystems and Indigenous Biodiversity chapter, just so it's clear.
Thank you. All right, we have it moved and seconded. All those in favour of the minutes being passed as true and correct, say aye. Against, carried. All right, we move into the main body of today's discussion. And Mr. Campbell, before I ask you to speak to it, I'd just like to pose a question that came from Councillor Blackler's email this morning. Was where is the recommendation to just pause the plan as indicated by government? And 2, how can officer advice in the form of a recommendation shift from earlier sessions where the chapters were so interconnected we couldn't pull the more controversial chapters out? Now it appears we can. What has changed? Floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll respond to those first before we delve into the report. So the Resource Management Consenting and Other System Changes Amendment Act doesn't allow for a pause. You either have to withdraw the plan entirely within the 90-day period or seek an exemption. So there is kind of no in between. What we've done is, in considering what matters the minister may consider for an exemption, we have looked at where there's topics that are contentious, have a lot of submissions, are likely to be challenged and probably go through an appeal period to the Environment Court. The minister has clearly, or Minister Bishop has clearly signalled that where plan processes are going to take time, cost more money, etc., they'll probably not get over the line from their point of view. So we took that on board and thought, well, there's no point putting an application to the Minister for the Environment, and understand that Minister Bishop may also be considering these, when that's the signal that they don't want councils to spend more time and money progressing things that will be protracted and cost more. So that's the only reason why the changes come, is because an application to include everything that is contentious would probably be thrown out, not supported by the minister.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Sorry, I don't quite see how that addresses the second question that Councillor Blackler asked. It hadn't occurred to me, but if the chapters were interconnected and therefore couldn't be untangled or separated and detached for the purpose of exempting from consideration earlier, why is that not the case now? Because the argument, if you look at options 1 and 2, that issue of interconnectivity is not implicitly or explicitly raised in either.
Yeah, option 2 is the preferred one because it has less interconnectivity than option 1. So it would be the simpler one to administer and move forward. It's whatever way, if it was the chapters pulled out, it's going to be very difficult to rewire the plan and take some time and work. But if you're only progressing the default, which is natural hazards, you probably just put that through as almost like a plan change. It'd be a discrete topic and that would be it. And the rest of the plan would simply fall away and revert back to the operative plan.
Supplementary, if I may. So, did officers consider the other option, i.e. pausing the total plan? I mean, in each of these recommendations, we have officer advocacy for exemption. I understand the logic of that in relation to the urban areas that are implicitly or explicitly involved. But was any consideration given relative in respect of Councillor Blackler's initial question, was any consideration given to a recommendation regarding the pausing of the whole plan?
Yeah, so the Amendment Act basically says you've got 90 days up, which takes us to mid-January next year to withdraw the plan. It's a mandated withdrawal unless you get an exemption granted by the minister. So there's effectively no ability to pause any longer.
So what Parliament's saying is you have to stop unless we give you permission to proceed with some or all of the plan because you've asked us to. Okay.
That's correct. And in the automatic exemptions, it's very limited as to what can carry on. And the only one that applies to us is around natural hazards by and large.
Mr. Cook.
Yeah, option 3 is do not seek an exemption.
Look, you're running hot, Councillor Hopkins, go for it.
Look, the other question, probably, I'm not sure if it's to you, David, Mr. Campbell, or to Mr. Cook. Reading the two options, 1 or 2, as they are worded in the recommendation, it did occur to me that under option 2, recommendations 4 and 5 don't relate to the plan itself and should not be treated as part of option 2. They should be voted on separately. Is that a view you would share?
So in the recommendations, they're all standalone. So it's either option 1 or 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6 are separate. Once you make a call on 1 or 2.
Councillor Hopkins, I would certainly be of a mind that I would be putting these individually, not collectively.
Thanks.
Mr Cook?
They were written to be individually, so you decide between 1, 2 or 3, and then that determines whether you need to do 4 or 5.
Okay, I'll jump into the report
Yep.
already. Just some of the key things before we delve into the detail. On page 16, sort of halfway down, there's, I guess, a reiteration of phase 3 reform. And note the section in bold highlighted, or bold italics, around the change there that's come through this recent legislation. What will happen going forward, and this is from the information signal by the ministry, is that whatever plan we have in place will slot into a combined sort of regional plan, or regional plans. We'll have 2, Otago and Canterbury. And the spatial plans we've prepared will be still relevant and take effect for Oamaru West and Kakanui. Some of the changes start to then roll out in terms of the natural environment and hazards matters that then go into a spatial plan developed by Canterbury and Otago regions. So regardless of what is in our plan, that work will still happen moving forward. And we will end up with the start of new regional plans, developing a whole new chapter for those. Again, 1 for Canterbury, 1 for Otago. So that is scheduled to commence sort of midway through 2027. That's in the diagram on page 15. That kind of gives you the timeline from MFE, and would be part of that process to develop combined plans with our neighbours and sort of under the regional umbrella. So effectively what we end up with from this process will feed into that, whether it's our old operative plan or whatever might be put forward in the proposed. Once this all lands with the phase 3 reform, the regional councils then pick up the functions around outstanding natural landscapes and features, SNAs, contaminated land and natural hazards. So that would kind of shift out of our wheelhouse into the regional councils. Then we're left with the typical things around land use and subdivision, noise, shading, etc. Those kind of more straightforward things, many of which we have in our plans at the moment. So what we're trying to do is sort of align a little bit with that future scenario and say, well, if we're progressing our plan, let's maybe concentrate on the things that aren't going to end up in that regional realm, so that we can progress things to update our old plan, allow for growth, etc., to continue. There's still uncertainty around where biodiversity and heritage sit, so that's still up in the air at this stage. So just to sort of remind you of those, I guess, future scenarios, and we will probably end up sitting in a planning regime will be quite different to where we are now. And we've tried to kind of align with that as much as possible. Around the recommendations, there are 2 there. The second one is probably the more straightforward one, as I mentioned, to implement. There are some, I guess, kind of exceptions there where there's opposition in the submissions raised to certain things. They can be taken out. If there's no opposition, it's probably worth keeping them, particularly for heritage and SNAs that can still leverage off our heritage and biodiversity funds. There's probably merit in keeping those where landowners are happy to have them, They can then apply for funding, which is still listed. And that's worked quite well to date for the ones that agree. So yeah, that's where we've landed. Obviously the hearing panel matters there for consideration, and we've taken on board previous feedback around making sure an elected member, potentially previous elected member, is part of that panel. And that panel's, if it gets through the process, will be considering a much narrower range of matters. And there's a final item there that's sort of a late one that popped in just around a request for some compensation around a late submission matter. So yeah, happy to work through these and see where we land.
Thank you. I would suggest that possibly the first thing that we need to decide is whether we favour option 1 or option 2 before we then dissect the option. Otherwise, we'll be sitting here going round and round in circles for some time. But that's just my thought, Mr. Cook.
I wonder if you should rule out option 3 first. Option 3 is not to seek an exemption. If the decision is to not seek an exemption, we don't need to talk anymore.
Well, on the basis of the conversation, I invite comment from members of the subcommittee. Councillor McCone.
I just have a question before any of that comes to the table. And you mentioned, David, that the plan change. What is the council's reason for seeking further exemptions, and why isn't that being included as an option?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor McCone. Yeah, you're right. The only automatic exemption is for natural hazards. We have had a lot of requests right throughout the district, Kuria, Palmerston, around Oamaru, and the current operative plan doesn't allow for that kind of future expansion or growth, or the infill that medium density provides as well. So if we don't seek an exemption, we're stuck with our operative plan and how it can happen. But yeah, I get your point. That would align with government's agenda as well around going for growth. Yeah.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I favour seeking an exemption, noting that in the end it's a matter of ministerial discretion. But I just invite everyone in the room to look around and see who's here in attendance. And these are people who are committed, energised and concerned, but they represent exclusively rural and agricultural and farming interests, because the contentious parts of almost exclusively, because the contentious parts of the plan are actually those that actually relate to rural general, outstanding natural landscapes, sites and areas of significance to Maori. Sorry, there is actually, I do apologise, there is actually, there are some small areas in Oamaru that are captured by the SASM provisions as well. So there are urban issues in that respect. But the debate, the concern, the anguish in some instances that's been expressed about the plan or some of the provisions within the plan, I think can be fairly accurately said to be predominantly related to rural issues and rural properties. We know from the feedback we've had that there's an appetite for more affordable housing, for alternative housing options, for smaller properties and the like. I don't think any of us have been lobbied by anybody about some of those. Well, I know there was at least one member of the committee who has some concerns about some of the density provisions. But I'm not aware of anyone being repeatedly and forcefully lobbied with regard to rescinding some of those provisions. I think they are a potential benefit to the district. Equally, we want to protect highly productive land on urban boundaries and margins and perimeters. If we can get an exemption from the minister that would allow some of those urban provisions and changes to proceed and be submitted on and modified through the submission process, I think that's a win for everyone. So in that respect, I personally would favour seeking an exemption for those urban chapters, particularly.
Mr Campbell?
Yeah, thank you. Just picking up on an important point Councillor Hopkins raised is that if council were agreeable to one of the options and it progressed, the submissions would still be considered. The further submissions would be narrowed down to just those topics. So if people went with option 2 and there was a whole lot of submissions on the SASMs, well, they would come out in terms of further submissions needing to be made. They're no longer relevant provisions to be submitted on. So they would drop away kind of naturally. People can then further submit on all the other provisions that remain, and the hearings would proceed and consider those matters. So it does provide for the hearings panel to still make adjustments to the plan to try and, tidy up those things where there's an ability to do so. So it's still directing that outcome that you'd go through the normal process, but it means the submission effort by submitters wouldn't be wasted on those topics that would remain.
So I know we need to amplify this discussion, but can we just go back? Is there an appetite within this committee to park the plan completely? Because that's one of the options that we need to discuss. And if there's not a majority that want to park it, then we can work through these options. Councillor Linwood?
For me personally, I think it does make complete sense to just park it completely until we've got a bit more clarity. But Councillor Hopkins did just make a lot of sense just then, so I'll give him credit for that. But I personally would like to just stop.
Mayor Kircher? Or Councillor McCone?
I think park it. The direction is pretty simple and it's been given, and the legislation says this is what's going to happen, or the proposed legislation. So rather than waste more money and time trying to second guess what's coming, let's just stop and look at the bottom and start from that and start tidying up some of the chapters we've got now, so that and when I say tie them up, take out the interlying web so that they will link to each other, not link to each other and distort what is conscientious out there at the right of the minute.
Thank you, Mr Chair. The government's giving us two messages. One is park the plan. The other is we want more land made available for housing. And they have been very strong about that message. And I think we do need to take the approach that actually our developers, people in our community want to do subdivisions. We should enable those things to happen. We should not be held up growing our district by that. It's kind of the opposite to a lot of the SNAs, which in theory do hold up growth and development. If we hold up the whole plan, then we'll be holding up that growth and development from those others. Acknowledging I had made a submission on zoning, but I do believe it's a submission that's in common with a lot of others, so I am speaking to it, to the topic. But overall, we need land for that development, for building more houses, for providing the houses that for the people who we want to come to our district, and we know will come if there is the housing there available for them. So that part's still important. I guess the challenge is for those parts of, for any exemptions, if we're providing for an exemption where the rules are likely to be changed by the government in a more liberal way. And that's where the SNAs and various things come in, I believe, is that if they're going to loosen up what the requirements are around that, then we shouldn't be exempting those types of things, because it's going to be held to a different standard in the future. Residential, rural lifestyle, whatever the zoning will be called in the future, the case for those isn't the same. So I'm definitely in favour of proceeding with what we can. It will be more costly. Maybe we can do MFE for some costs along the way, as has happened in the past with other councils. But yeah, let's do what we can. Let's have some control of what we can. And on that particular topic, let's make sure that it's the governance team chooses who actually are sitting on the panel, because if we're not sitting there ourselves, then at least having control of who sits there is important. Let's not abdicate that responsibility either.
No, we will address that later on.
Through that and for,
Yeah.
bonus point.
Thank you. Councillor Percival, your position?
I sort of align myself with Gary because, and I'd like to ask David, if we did stop entirely, when would the plan be put in place? There's an 18-month, 2-year stalling on that, which would mean that what we've worked very hard on, as far as the rest, we know what we want to do, we know what we want exempted, we've got that put in here, but all the work that's been done previously on, as Gary mentioned, the development of the district, that we're going back, we would go back to the existing plan, which would not be promoting what we've just been talking about. Does that make sense? The timeline is what I'm after.
Yeah, that's a good point, Councillor Percival. So on page 15 is the government sort of prescribed timeline. So basically, if we're at the start on the left-hand side, if we do a scenario of stopping the whole plan, except that natural hazards could progress, we would then revert back to the operative plan. So nothing would be worked on the proposed plan, nothing would be tidied up or amended. We would then we would then start working with the regional councils on the spatial plan work. That's already underway with both Canterbury and Otago. And our plan would slot into a regional plan for each, our current plan, whatever we end up. From mid-2027 onwards, and this depends on the speed of the phase 3 going through, councils start developing combined plans. So we would dust off our proposed plan and say, here's what we had back in 2025. That would then feed into the Canterbury and Otago combined regional plans. And that would start the process in 2027. You'd then go through and to call for submissions on those and whatever process is set up, but I imagine have the same sort of flow to it, submissions, hearings, etc. So you can imagine, starting that in 2027, there's probably another, 2 to 5 years potentially of that process before an updated plan is prepared for Waitaki that sits in the Canterbury and Otago plans. So it's quite a long time frame from now to when we start working on a new plan to when it's actually in force. In that intervening period, we would have whatever's agreed to.
Thank you for that explanation. I'm just going to go to Councillor Cowles, who's joining us online.
Thank you. While not a member of the committee, obviously I've followed this through. Probably come as no surprise that I was one of the ones who voted not to notify originally. And I guess for me, if I look at this, my risk was for many reasons. One of them was around what the cost will be on moving as a council at the moment. If there's additional cost, I think we have to be particularly frugal. So that would be one of my opinions. The other one is, whilst the submissions are predominantly around the rural side, it kind of hasn't leapt out to me that there's a whole heap of people submitting to move on the other side around development and those sorts of things. So I would probably be of the mind, were it to come back to council for a decision, to probably be joining with Councillor McCone and and Linwood around not submitting. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Just by way of clarification, any of the councillors can participate in these subcommittee meetings. However, they can't participate in the vote. And I'd also just clarify that the decisions of the subcommittee today will be a recommendation to the whole of council. So it will have to be ratified by the whole of council. The other thing is, for those of you joining us online, as well as those in the chamber, the ones online are behaving, but can those members of the public in the chamber please refrain from speaking while the debate's going on? That would be much appreciated. Thank you. Councillor McCone, are you wanting to speak again?
Always want to speak. Yeah, just give us a couple of minutes. I lost my train of thought there for a minute after that. Sorry.
That's all right. Well, personally, I'm in favour of us progressing the plan, but for the reasons that others have outlined, that we do need to get on and tidy up the residential settlement and rural lifestyle zone chapters. However, I do have other concerns that I would raise coming through. The other question, for Mr. Campbell, you tell us that what you have inserted are the non-controversial ones. I don't want to impugn the character of staff, but we're taking your word on this. We haven't actually seen a breakdown of the submissions. Can you actually give us an indication of where the majority of the submissions lay?
Yeah, so we have over 300 submissions, and a lot of the submission points cover everything in the plan, from definitions, transport, energy, etc. Some of those submitters are, your companies, nationwide groups, government departments. So they're always trying to sort of get things to align with their business or activity. So they will come in quite hard seeking to have things amended. For instance, the definitions, some of them are national planning standards definitions that are set anyway, so they can't be changed. So even though people are submitting on them, it's a wee bit pointless in that respect. Clearly, the topics listed in option 2 are of a high interest, particularly to rural landowners, but also some of the urban areas with the SESMs. They are the ones from our previous plan that went through court. So we're looking at previous experience on what was brought out through the Environment Court. Where we have submissions on other things like definitions or thresholds for earthworks, that sort of thing, they are generally dealt with through hearings and resolved. So while they might be submitted in opposition, it doesn't always give a signal to how they play out in terms of hearings, etc. So we could, fill you with a whole lot of statistics around what the submission points are on, but that probably wouldn't help inform a decision like this. It's to say, look, these are the contentious ones. We know they're from history or previous experience ones that will be challenged right through. They do have, I guess, greater impacts in terms of regulatory matters, as the Mayor pointed out. But yeah, a lot of the other things people will still submit on, but they're not as contentious. Doesn't say they won't necessarily be or couldn't be appealed, but when people are trying to get something reworded, is different from a outright opposition to something.
No, thank you for that explanation. Councillor Hopkins.
I was simply going to ask, Mr. Chair, whether you felt, if I read the room correctly, I think 4 of us have signalled that we would favour seeking a partial exemption, and 2 have indicated that they were not of the mind. Is that sufficient to move on to consideration of options 1 or 2, or do you want to vote on option 3?
We can formalise if you like, although I believe the indication is that we want to proceed, so that we should proceed to the examination of option 1 and option 2.
Okay.
Councillor McCone.
Should we not proceed at all, David? Is there steps in there? But, so I'm going back to, this is the second RMA change since the thing's been incepted. So it's taken 40 years to do 2 10-year plans. So if they change it again, is it going to take another 5 or 10 years to actually get to where we're going? The base behind that question is there an option that the government has signalled while they work out what's going on to actually tweak the RMA at the moment to make it suit part and parcel? Secondly, well, yes, but secondly, the second part of that is in option 1 or 2, why have we not got specific chapters and details of what is actually sitting in there? I know it's hard and there's a lot of work in that, but this is a very complex document that means a lot to a lot of people. So if we're going to start making decisions on what is and what isn't going, we need to be defined by the exact chapters and what they mean for a decision, in my mind.
Thank you, Councillor McCone. So yeah, the first matter really is that everything will stop unless it's already in train with hearings. And then once the new legislation lands, the 2 new acts, Spatial Act and the Planning Act, then councils would ramp up again in midway through 2027 if it goes to plan. So from then on is kind of when we'd start this whole process again for us. Going back to the specifics, we could look to, I guess, slice and dice the chapters in terms of objectives, policies, rules, etc. But it would get quite messy if you tried to pull bits of it out and then leave bits of it there. So it's probably easier to keep as an option 2 those topics as discrete chapters to come out. We have put some exceptions in there under C, D and E to refine it, but basically the whole provisions would come out for ease of trying to manage it with submissions, etc.
Thank you. And look, I know you're doing a lot of good work and everything else, but it means so much to so many. And if we've got to slice and dice it to make sure that things are exempt, then so be it if it goes that way. But what I'm trying to get in is it the cost and the benefit of the district not worth doing that? And if people have taken the time to object to it and everything else, every objection should be heard because that is their right to get this in the right direction.
Whatever outcome is results from this process, we have to put out a public notice to explain what the proposed plan would look like going forward. We would also notify all submitters as well, because they'd obviously put in that effort. So there will be an explanation as to what does or doesn't proceed. If people have submitted on the SASMs and that doesn't proceed, then they can kind of breathe a sigh of relief and say, feel we don't have to progress effort and more costs and time on that, but they might have submitted on other provisions in the plan and can concentrate on those. So yeah, it'll be clear what is and isn't out.
Mr. Cook.
Yes, just in response to Councillor McCain's concern that he's raised on page 19 in option 1, where the option is considered, there is a paragraph on what each one actually means. So it does give a summary of the implications of progressing on what the team would be looking to put through. Some of those are chapters on their own, such as the energy infrastructure, stormwater and transport. Designations is quite a significant piece of work that would benefit from being done, and the details around the large industrial zones to support those businesses.
Thank you for that. I'd just like to ask a question, Mr. Campbell, around the use of language and the interpretation of that use of language. So use, for example, listed heritage items that are not opposed by submitters why did we say not opposed instead of supported by landowners?
It's a very good point and a very subtle difference there. We've previously come unstuck with this with previous council resolutions, and often people won't submit on something if they're not happy with it. They might just say, yep, that's fine, don't submit. Where someone is unhappy, they will obviously submit and say we oppose it. So it's a cleaner delineation of where something is not supported. And it's clear in the submissions they either support or oppose. So you might have, say you've got 200 heritage items, there might be, I don't know, 20 or 30 opposed, there might be 20 or 30 supported, and the remainder might be neutral or no submission at all. So it's a clear signal where they oppose that they don't want it.
Thank you for the explanation. I think back to our founding document of Te Tiriti, and 150 years later, we're still debating the meaning of what was written there. So I think the use of language is very important in this space. My next question is, why have we pulled one particular submission out and given credence to geopark sites when until now it's just been part of the whole raft of overlays?
Yeah, I guess we've signalled a couple of potential things. Firstly, the Waitaki Whitestone Geopark that has the UNESCO classification, so it's got a higher order endorsement that it's not RMA related, but it's quite significant. And also the Heritage New Zealand proposed National Historic Landmark. So I guess a couple of things that kind of sit overarching for parts of the district or all of the district that are not necessarily RMA driven, but are quite significant in terms of the signal by external agencies of the importance of those things. And we have, with the geopark, listed the geosites that have had submissions on them, so it does give you that balance of what's people are concerned about there for those matters.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, if I may. Thank you for the answers you've given so far. I'll be interested, Mr. Chair, in whether you were satisfied with Mr. Campbell's explanation as to why the words not opposed have been preferred to fully supported. I personally thought supported may have made more sense, but Mr. Campbell's explanation is also persuasive. But my questions relate to some of the information provided on page 17. First of all, I'm not persuaded that giving regional councils the role of determining ONFs and ONLs is going to solve the problem. The problem is still the definition of what is a natural landscape. And I still believe that the definition employed in RMA planning is far too inclusive and co-opts modified and industrial landscapes that can no longer be truly described as natural. So my question is, to what extent are we going to have an ability to actually influence how regional councils do end up defining ONFs and ONLs and SNAs for that matter? Equally, on the same page, there's a reference to further down to the need to incorporate statutory acknowledgements from treaty settlements and SASMs. Now, I can see how there must be provision, how the Crown must include provision for statutory acknowledgements from treaty settlements to the extent that there are such things. But how can there be statutory acknowledgements of SASMs when the SASM itself is a concept that's only recently been introduced into RMA plans? I mean, this current generation of plans are the only ones that have SASMs, Waihi Tupuna, rather than Waihi Tapu. And so I can't see how there are statutory acknowledgements relating to that, and can some light be shed on that, please?
Mr. Campbell, just if I can cut you off at the pass, I think your question round regional plans is relevant, but probably not relevant to this conversation, councillor. Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
Yeah, just briefly, I guess, these things have been signalled as coming down the line. There's clearly no discussion of significant natural features going forward, so that would drop out potentially. And understand there will be probably new criteria developed nationally on what qualifies as outstanding. And that feeds into the regulatory takings concept as well, which is quite important. There has been specific mention of both the statutory acknowledgements from treaty settlements, and we have those in the current plan for certain features. And they have specifically mentioned that the SASMs would be added under the new sort of spatial planning regime. So those have been provided by Ngāi Tahu. So you imagine across Canterbury, they'll have a whole map for Canterbury and Otago that would be provided for that new spatial plan.
I'm keen to progress the conversation around whether we favour option 1 or option 2, but I can be guided by the members of the subcommittee. Councillor McCone?
I just have one question or two, actually. So the urban part of it, David, can that be put on the table just strictly on its own as an urban thing? So we don't interfere with any of the SASMs, the ONAs or anything else that's contentious sitting out there at the moment, geoparks, so we can allow growth. And bearing that in mind, I know we've got to look forward as well, but the population growth targets we've been given for the next 8 to 10 years are 10%, which is 1,200 people across the district. So if you do the maths working backwards, the average family size, so that's brain's gone dumb, 400 houses probably in the next 10 years. So can we isolate that out? And correct me if I'm wrong, from what I picked up before, there's too much work in identifying some of the SASMs to unravel it. So for us to put on the table, that how will we go about going to the government then applying for an exemption on those issues?
No, that's good questions, Councillor McCone. So the first one around the urban, I mean, option 1A would singularly deal with that, but it misses some of the other important parts of the plan as well. Likewise, option 2, if you strip out those provisions listed, you would still then be dealing with urban, rural, etc. So either one would address that. In terms of provisions, there is an ability between now and the council meeting to seek ministry's feedback on a draft application. So if the subcommittee pick one of these options, we can take that to the ministry and say, hey, what's your kind of steer on this? That would either tell us a yay or a nay indication. It's not a decision, it's just a preliminary feedback. If they were of a mind to look at one of those, they might say, well, what provisions are you talking about? When we list provisions, that includes maps and rules. So it's the whole suite of things related to any one of those topics. So we talk about SASMs or ONLs, it's the maps, the rules, objectives of policies that all tie into that would disappear. So it's clear when we say the word provisions, it's all encompassing.
Mr. Cook?
Yeah, because they often work in tandem. Someone might like the mapped area, but they might not like the rules as well, and vice versa.
Thank you. I do just want to reinforce something that David said earlier, which was if you choose any exemptions, they still have to go through the traditional, and they get approved at ministerial level. They still have to go through the standard Schedule 1 plan making process, which is submissions on the submissions that relate to those, hearings, and then final approval by the council at the time.
Councillor Hopkins?
Mr. Chair, picking up on your point about progressing things, I'll test the mood of the meeting. I would move recommendation 1, A, B, C, D, E, F, G and H.
Do we have a seconder to support that? It would appear that, oh, well, look, yeah, we'll hold that. And I'll just, while you read it, Mr. Campbell, coming back to the language, option 1, listed heritage items that are not opposed by submitters. And then in option 2, heritage items where these are opposed by landowners. We seem to be having a bob each way here as to how we describe. Yes, I know that, yes.
Yeah, apologies there. It is intended to mean the same thing. It's just a different way it's written. So you could make them the same if you were.
No, yeah,
Yeah.
I realise, but it still comes back to the understanding. And I would suggest that because someone has not opposed something, do we have the right to presuppose that they support it?
Well, I guess there's two things here. One is they might be neutral or they support it. But when a hearings panel considers the provisions, so say there was no one submitted on this building, the hearings panel go, well, there's no submission on that. It can be retained in the heritage schedule and the rules that go with it. If someone opposes something and they come up with a good argument as to why it shouldn't be listed, the hearings panel might agree with them. If someone supports something, equally they'll say, well, that's good. We'll keep including it in the plan. So opposing, it's kind of looking at that end point of where the decision may land. So if someone's neutral or support, generally that item would stay. If they oppose it, there's probably more chance it would change.
All right,
Yeah, so
thank
just
you.
trying to keep it aligned with where the likely decision may end up.
So going back to the motion on the table from Councillor Hopkins, is anyone prepared? Mayor Kircher?
I'm mindful of the fact that I've.
Yes, you can speak to it quickly.
Yes, I will briefly. I favour this because it meets some of the concerns expressed by those who want to pause the whole plan. As I read one, it is clearly more limited. We are seeking exemptions for a very specific suite of proposals and measures within the plan, the residential settlement and rural lifestyle zones, listed heritage items. Now, there may be an amendment forthcoming that are supported by submitters rather than not opposed. The same might apply to the geosites one. Then the sites that are listed in the Oamaru Historic Town Centre. So there are the A, B, C, D, E, F, and G and H are very precise. And they are the only things we're seeking ministerial permission to progress. Everything else is paused. Everything else.
Not actually paused, it's stopped.
Was stopped. And,
Yes.
and in every other respect, with regard to rural generals, SASMs, SNLs, ONFs, ONLs, all of that, the provisions of the operative plan apply, not the notified plan. So to my mind, this actually addresses the primary concerns of those who are anxious about the notified plan, while enabling the elements within it that will benefit other sections of the community and the district as a whole. And I would urge members of the subcommittee to support it.
Mayor Kircher?
Yeah, I've supported it because everything I'm seeing there, I think are less contentious. I do have one question, which is just really around are any of those subject to changing standards or likely to be subject to changing standards? And if so, at what point do they get changed? Is it through a submission from officers type scenario? Otherwise, it's going to allow growth to happen, and things like the designations, things like the energy infrastructure, stormwater and transport, the things that need to happen will ideally be able to happen a bit sooner than otherwise, and those things that are most contentious will be stopped and recreated in some form or other, lesser form perhaps, in 2 years' time. But it does allow us to get on and do the things that are going to help our district grow.
Thank you. Councillor McCone.
Yeah, look, I will be voting against it for the very reason it's such a contentious issue and it means so much to so many, and it's not definitive. It's very wishy-washy in what it says. So unless there are numbers and chapters that are written there that are in black and white, I won't be following it at all. The government has signalled a major change, so why are we trying to fly in the face of the government if we can't prove it to ourselves?
Because government sees things like this.
Thank you, Councillor McCone. I will point out that the proposed district plan was published and is on our council website and is available to all of us to peruse. The fact that it's not here in this paper does not mean that we haven't had access to it. Before I put the motion, I'd just like to point out that option 1 is not staff's preferred option, but we are pursuing option 1. Mr. Campbell, you would like to speak to the motion?
Just to address the Mayor's question around, those chapters or provisions that might be subject to change. I think in the report it talks about that, particularly around energy and infrastructure. There are those national directions that are being amended and worked through at the moment. So if this is progressed, there is potentially an avenue through the submission process where that submissions made to those to realign to that national direction. The other ones less so. Yeah, that's probably the main areas around that. Energy infrastructure, potentially stormwater transport to a lesser degree.
Councillor Hopkins.
So I'd like to exercise a very brief right to reply. Point 1, it is not wishy-washy. The whole reason for my moving option 1 is that the A, B, C, D, E, F, G and H are very precise, and they are the only things we will be asking the Minister to consider exemption from the pause requirement. Equally, the government has paused plans but said in its legislation that councils can ask for permission to proceed with some parts of it. That the government is willing to let people do this where there are sections of plans that are perceived to be of local, regional and national benefit. And so we are actually addressing and meeting government provisions and intentions, not ignoring them.
Thank you. I intend to put the motion, and again, by way of explanation, this will be a recommendation from the subcommittee to the council meeting probably on the 30th of September. Mr. Campbell, you have another point of...
Yeah, sorry, I should have raised it earlier in response to Councillor McCone's question. We can provide chapter numbers and more clarity before if it goes to council. So it would list, if it's residential, it might say chapter whatever number and residential. So we can provide that clarity just so it's clear for everyone.
No, thank you for that offer. I'm sorry, councillor, but the motion's been put. The speakers have had their right of reply. I will bend the rules, though, if you want to speak, Councillor Percival.
Yeah, subsection C, the geosites, that I'm not very comfortable with that, and the fact that those that aren't covered by on the existing plan, are they not covered by property owners' covenants on their own properties? Why do we have to include everything? Because, I mean, put it this way, is the geopark and the site's going to be a permanent fixture?
Some geosites are protected by QE2 or other covenants, but not all of them. What we've identified is that some have, and not all of them have, the overlays, landscape overlays over the top. And there was a list there that had a handful that are opposed. So we've sought to take those out of the list that would carry on. I think there's 40 odd geosites, so yeah, there might be a handful that miss out on having that protection going forward. But yeah, the geopark folk would try and work with landowners around other forms of protection if that's not available through the plan. But it was a UNESCO recommendation to have some sort of protection there.
Councillor, if it's any consolation, I do share your concerns, but we do have a motion put and seconded, and I'm going to put that to the meeting and say, all those in favour, please say aye. Against? Sorry.
No, I was sorry. I should have said aye before.
All right. So I declare the motion carried. So we therefore move on to options 4 and 5. One is that we recommend that the CE has delegation to make an application for these exemptions.
You move, Mr Chair, it's pro forma.
And seconded by Mayor Kircher. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. The governance advisor has reminded me that I skipped 3. I didn't know that it's basically an explanatory note saying that parts of the PROS plan that are automatically exempt will be progressed. But I believe that that relates to number 2. Is that correct, Mr Campbell?
No, it's basically just acknowledging that natural hazards will be included regardless. So there's the whole list you've
Yes.
agreed to, but natural hazards will be added as an automatic exemption, so we don't have to seek that from the minister separately.
So therefore we don't need a minute to,
Well, I'll move, we know that.
all right. All right. So if that's the case, it's been noted by the committee, so and accepted. All those in favour say aye. Carried. Right, number 5, delegates to the Chief Executive the appointment of a hearing panel comprising a minimum of 3 commissioners, one of which is a current or recent term WDC councillor who holds a valid Making Good Decisions certification. Personally, I would oppose this. My thoughts are that by all means, the Chief Executive has given the delegation to seek suitable members of a hearing panel, but that approval of that hearing panel would come back to a full council decision to support. But that's just my personal opinion. Councillor Hopkins.
Mr Chair, I sadly will have to leave at the conclusion of the comments I'm going to make, but I totally share that view, and I would urge members of the committee to support a recommendation that basically requests that the Chief Executive to recommend the appointment of a hearing panel comprising a minimum of 6 commissioners, 3 of whom should include councillors, because one of the big debates about plans is that we want a local choice, local voice. And a couple of iterations of the RMA back, the one thing that the RMA allowed was for councillors to be appointed to consider submissions on district plans. That has now changed. Councillors are still able to be appointed, but they have to be commissioners as well. And in my view, to maintain that local voice and to have that local representation on a plan that is intended to articulate, capture local issues and articulate local concerns, I believe that should be rather jealously guarded by elected members. And so my view is that the idea that a minimum of 3 commissioners, with only one of them being a Waitaki district councillor is not acceptable. On that basis, I shall exit stage left.
As you pack, are you advocating that we potentially identify 6 people, but any 3 of them will be on a hearings committee? Or are you saying that we go to what I think would be rather unwieldy of having 6 commissioners?
No, I was asking, I mean, basically, if, rather than have the chief executive appoint people, I believe the chief executive should have the right and be entitled to recommend that council vote on the suitability of up to 6 commissioners, 3 of whom would be, if they are available, 3 of whom would be councillors with commissioner standing. And it would be then the responsibility of the council, when it actually considers submissions, to decide if a set of submissions on a matter is going to be considered by 1 or 3 commissioners. I wouldn't recommend 2 because there's likely to be the possibility of a 50-50 stalemate. But that's been the practice, as far as I'm aware, with most plans in most districts on most occasions.
Thank you. Mr. Cook?
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to Councillor Hopkins's comment there may be a practicality issue in that we may not have 3 councillors that are qualified as commissioners after the election, and the time that it takes to get councillors onto the course and qualified could result in delays in the process.
Mr. Campbell?
Thank you. Yeah, potentially you could still add in that current or recent councillor as an option, if that gives you a bit more flexibility in the makeup of the, I guess, elected member side of the panel. And you know, it could be a pool of up to 6 people, and then it's decided how many are needed for the actual hearings. You generally try and have an odd number, so you don't end up with a split vote. But yeah, you could certainly have up to 6, and that makeup, as Councillor Hopkins mentions, but maybe slot in around having a former recent councillor, if that helps give flexibility for the panel to continue operating, particularly where there's a bit of a changeover with new members potentially.
Mayor Kircher?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with that approach. I think yeah, if you can have an option which is horses for courses, and some expertise in there, that's really good. I think you know, we're going to have 2 new councillors who have got some competency around this particular topic, and it'd be interesting to see if, just how things might go with including some of that new batch in this. I take on board Mr. Cook's questions around the time to qualify or to be certified, and that may be a factor, but I think if the general direction is that we have a pool of 6 that covers you know, at least 3 elected members, either just recent elected members or incumbent councillors, then that would be helpful. So it's a bit difficult at this end, this side of the election, to know exactly what's going to happen, but I'd urge us to keep an open mind on that and to try and make sure that we do keep decision making as local as possible on this, and we don't abdicate that responsibility to people who may be, you know, all come from outside the district.
Councillor McCay?
So just to get clarification of what I was hearing, Jim suggested that we get up to 6 different commissioners, of which some must be councillors, of which the council itself will decide of which commissioners are going to sit on which panels.
Correct. So the recommendation would be that we delegate to the chief executive the appointment of up to 6 people to a hearings panel, sorry. What I'm talking about is the recruitment of potential people, and the proviso will be that the final appointment will be made by council.
I think a request to the CE to bring a report with suitable recommendations along the lines that we've talked about. So that can be the next council, likely, will be the one that makes the decision on, do they agree with those 6? And then further to that, having some process of agreement around which of those 6 will sit on any particular issue.
We still need to word a motion going forward.
To read out the resolution that I've got.
Thank you.
Okay, suggested resolution is that the subcommittee requests that the chief executive recommends to council the appointment of a hearings panel comprising of up to 6 commissioners, 3 of whom are councillors or former recent councillors with commissioner training.
I'm happy to propose that. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. We move on to item number 6. And this is a little housekeeping matter where there was a requirement for a late and urgent submission. And the recommendation from staff is that council agrees to compensate the cost to the 2 landowners who had to prepare that urgent submission. Mr. Campbell, do you want to say anything further?
Yeah, just briefly related to the timing effectively, because the meeting was right at the end of April. The letters went out at the start of May, and of course the submission period closed mid-May, and by the time slow post gets to people, it doesn't give them much time. They had to quickly scurry to get their lawyer to put something in as a holding pattern. And the cost was set out there. It's not huge, but there's only one other landowner that potentially could ask for costs as well, probably in a similar order. So it's not a big cost, but it just acknowledges that tight time frame that we, I guess, set landowners in this instance, which is a one-off.
Is someone prepared to move that we give that recommendation to council? Thank you, Councillor Linwood. Seconded, Councillor McCone. Oh, sorry, that's right. It involves spending council money. No, I'm happy to second that motion and test the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. And unless anyone has anything other urgently to raise, we've come to that fateful time where we can put the District Plan Review Subcommittee to bed for 2025. Thank you for those who have watched online. Thank you for those who have come to chambers. We do and are constantly aware that this is an absolutely critical issue for our district. And I will certainly be watching with interest going forward the progression of the plan. So at 11:22, I declare